review by me, Tubby Engineer. Today I'm going to be reviewing a Kayfun 4 Clone by Moander that I bought from Puff Palace. Now, I'm not going to get into the whole original clone debate. The reason I'm doing this review is because someone actually, or several people on the Planet of the Vapes forum have actually asked me to do the review. Now, I've got the two here. I've got my original one with the blue e-liquid in it, and the clone one here with the red e-liquid in it. The blue is Mr. Kraken's shade and the red is Red Esther from T-Juice. Now, if you look at these two together, you can actually see that they are, to all intents and purposes, visually identical. There is a slight difference here on the airflow rings. On the original, the airflow rings have got bevels in the faces, and on the clone they are flat. Now, the other differences between the original and the clone: the fit and finish on the clone. Finish is for the most part okay externally. Internally, some of the machining isn't as good as on the original. Fitting wise, there is, more play in the base section on this clone. There's also an issue with this where if you tighten the 510 pin up underneath too much, it makes the juice flow control nearly impossible to turn. You only need to back it off about 1/8 of a turn on the 510 pin and it will work fine. Now, I will pop up some photos at the end of this, and I may sprinkle one or two in the video as well. I'm not going to do the whole close-up thing because the physical makeup of it is identical to the original Kayfun 4, with some very slight changes to materials. Mostly the fact that this is 304 stainless steel, not 316. It's not the same stainless steel as the original. And the spring that's used to connect the base section to the centre airflow pin appears to be just a standard chrome steel rather than the beryllium copper silver plated one that the original uses. Now, because of the less precise tolerances used in the clone, you do get more of the wandering resistance issue than with the original. The reason I've delayed making this review is because I've been working on decreasing the issue of the wandering ohms. Now, I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. In the meantime, I want to obviously tell you about this. Let me just take a vape. That's one of the other things I've noticed. This occasionally on my mod seems to disconnect. It's probably due to the spring that I've been mucking around with. I will be replacing that sooner or later. Straight out of the box, this thing was okay. With Kanthal in it, it vaped well. The flavour was good, you know, virtually identical to the original, and vapour production is on a par with the original. As I said, there was more of an issue with the resistance varying, but on a Kanthal build that's less of a problem than it is with the nickel builds. On nickel builds, this thing was next to useless. The resistance wandered around too much, and you kept having to play around and tighten and loosen the flow control, you know, open and close the flow control to get the resistance back, and you had to keep resetting the coil, resetting the mod by removing the atomizer, firing it, putting it back on, firing it again to get it to register the new resistance. So for temperature control builds straight out the box, no use. As a Kanthal atomizer, fair enough. Now, the wandering ohms issue, I will put up a photo in a second showing the base section from inside, and I will point out where I made the modification. Now, the modification I've made, I was originally going to try and fix the spring that connects the top and bottom sections together. I was originally going to try and fix that to the small nut that the 510 pin screws into. However, I couldn't get the damn thing to stay. I cleaned it, what have you, tried to solder the spring in place, and it wasn't going. What I did discover, however, was that after I faffed about trying to solder the spring to the nut, I cleaned the spring off. And it struck me that if I couldn't fix the spring to the nut, perhaps I could make the spring more or less permanently attached to the central airflow pin. So what I've actually done is to decrease the diameter of one end of the spring. The last coil of the spring, I've actually curved it inwards so that the diameter is smaller, and press fitted it onto the central airflow pin. Now, on the original one, that has pretty much removed the wandering ohms issue. I can go an entire day of use, 2 days of use. In fact, the only time the ohms really change is if I dismantle it and re-wick, and that is obviously due to me messing around with the coil and what have you. On a full day's use on the original with the spring press fitted to the centre post, it's more or less eliminated the resistance change. On this one, as you saw, I've had a couple of issues with it showing check atomizer, and it does seem to be that spring, which I will deal with probably over the weekend. On this, after I narrowed the diameter of one end of the spring and press fitted it onto the post, it's pretty much removed the issue for Kanthal builds. And on a Kanthal build, this thing will pretty much, yeah, now it's doing the check atomizer thing again. it's probably damage I've caused to the spring. Oh, no, the 510 pin had come loose. This is, oops, sorry. This is the problem I have been having with it. The 510 pin comes loose, or the spring moves. There we go. Trouble is, you see, it's difficult to tell. With the 510 pin in place and the spring repaired, this thing is fine as a Kayfun atomizer with the modified spring. It's also virtually eliminated the problem for nickel builds. You do occasionally get a slight resistance change of about 2 to 300ths of an ohm, so 0.02 to 0.03 change, which doesn't make too much difference to the final temperature control result. So, in conclusion, yes, the clone, this particular clone, the Moander version, would make a good introduction to the Kayfun 4 for someone who wants to find out how it works, whether it's any good for them, what have you. As an everyday atomizer, I would probably say if you're going to use temperature control, you need the original. For Kayfun builds, if you're prepared to put up with these slight issues due to quality control, which this obviously doesn't have as good a quality control as the original, then yes, if you're on a tight budget, you could use one of these without any real issues. As I say, vape wise, virtually identical to the original. Quality wise, not as good. And if you're going to use nickel temperature control builds, then my personal recommendation would be buy the original. Well, that's all I can really say for this. I'll put up some photos of the packaging I received it in and the actual atomizer and the atomizer in pieces as well, just so that you can see what it's like inside and make your own mind up. Well, I've been Tubby Engineer and thank you for watching. Bye now.